Hi, everyone. As I said, I'm Jody Sinclair. I'm going to get the session kicked off here and then turn it over to the people who know a whole lot more than I do at this point. I am the VP of the HR Solutions team here at itelligence. And we've got some very exciting innovations that we want to share with you. Some releases from this quarter's releases from SAP that we think are going to really help to transform your operations, increase your employee engagement, and deliver results. So we're going to have three different panelists today. The first one will be Dan DeBoard. Dan is one of our senior solutions consultants. Dan is going to be talking about our new company organization hierarchy structure. Then Dan's going to turn it over to Kim Logwood, who is a solution consultant in our team as well. And Kim is going to talk about the new updated learning assessments feature within the LMS. And then finally, last but not least, we have Tracy Webster. Tracy is a senior solutions consultant in our team as well, and she's going to be talking about foundation data on a requisition. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
Good morning, everyone. This is Dan DeBoard. I'm going to talk about the new company hierarchy structure. And some of the first questions that always are asked is, what is the value, or why would I do this, and what is the value to my organization for turning this component of SuccessFactors on? And really it boils down to this, is that we've had the org structure, we've had the position org structure in place, and a lot of people have been asking about, what about my master data, my org? How does my org structure relate to each other? So the value in this is that you can get a visual look at what your org structure looks like. Now, this is assuming, of course, up front that you've got associations in place, and that's what drives this behind the scenes, and we'll get into that more a little bit later. But you can see how your company code relates to your division, your business unit, your departments, your cost center, any of the new MDF foundation objects you can use to look at this, and you can see the relationship between those objects. Not only can you see the relationship between those objects, but it allows you to then quickly go to each individual object, and providing how you've got it configured, you can see how many employees are in those jobs within that cost center, for example, and how many positions are in that cost center. So we'll get into that a little bit more later. But really the key thing here is that you can very quickly, without having to run any reports, go to a visual thing and kind of look at your organization top down and see how is it built, how many positions are there, how many different organization units are underneath each individual one. So if you want to do a restructure, you could actually then go in and restructure and look at that. And it also allows you, just like the other two org charts that we have currently, it allows you to look at those on a date specific. So if you did a reorg 6 months ago, you can look at how it looked like 6 months ago, compare that to what it looks like today. So this is a very handy thing. This is why SuccessFactors has brought this out. And they first released this on the last release in 1705 on a beta version, but now it's fully released out into 1708 with some additional enhancements, which are really nice. So moving along, we go to the next slide here. This is what the org structure looks like today, and it shows you how people relate to their managers, moving up with the organization. And many companies use this to see, who reports to who within the organization, which is really a good feature. The next one is position one. It shows when you have position hierarchy in place and you got position management turned on and you've got higher level positions, it shows how the positions relate to each other. So the new functionality is, how does the organization pieces report to each other? In this particular one, here's an example of it where we've got a business unit. It has one division reporting to it, and then it has two departments actually it has 13 departments, but we're only showing 2. You'll notice in the very lower left corner here it says 13. That tells you how many units are underneath this particular one. In this screenshot, we're only showing the top 2. This is very handy, and depending upon how you set your organization up, you can have this. The other thing is you can have multiple company structures. So you could have different company structures if you wanted to, based on the way you've got your association set up. I have one customer, for example, that has a single line of organization structure where they're each reporting to a company code, and they have like a business unit reporting, they've got a division, a department, and a cost center. They don't report up through, but it's just one level. And so they can actually have 4 different company structures and be able to look at this from all 4 different views. You can also do searches based on what you have put in place. So you've got divisions, departments. You can actually even search by employees. Once you have employees lined up in here, you can search by employees. Then once you decide how you want to search, then you can do a further search, just like in managed data, where you pick what area you want to do it, and then you go from there. And so this is very easy. It's a very short drop-down list. It's very easy for people to use, very intuitive to work with. That's one of the key things. It's very intuitive. It's, again, it's another way for you to look at your organization and see how it relates. Now, the one caveat is it has to be one of the new MDF Foundation objects. So one of the things that I know that right now that a lot of people are looking at is location. Well, location is not part of the MDF objects yet, and so you cannot build that into this. So it's really, at this point, it's the company code, it's the business units, the divisions, the departments, the cost centers. Those are the things you're really looking at for how your organization structure is set up. The thing about this is once you get into this, there are ways, you can click on the department, and the department comes up, and you can see. Now, you can control what shows up in these details. There's not a lot of fields currently, but there's some fields that are out there and available. So you can see whether or not, is this department active? You know, this particular one has got a default cost center. It doesn't have a relationship to the cost center. It's got a default one, which is only one-to-one relationship. So that shows up here. We have that. You can see the history of the department. You can see how many people are in there and how many FTE assigns are in there. So this might be helpful from a budgeting viewpoint of this department has this many people. And what's nice is it actually gives you an alphabetically listed list of all those employees. And for each of these employees that's listed, you can also click on a quick card for that employee. So it's a very quick way to go in and look at your department, see who's working in that department by name, and then be able to actually look at their quick cards also. Besides looking at it from a people view, you'll notice I've got these expanded, I got the details expanded, I've got the history expanded, I got the people expanded. On this very next slide, you'll notice that we had the positions expanded. Now in this particular case, we had 21 people, but 22 positions, which means that there's a vacant position out here. Offhand, I can't tell you which one that is, but I do know that there's a vacant position within this group. Now, you could go into again, positions are listed by alphabetical order, every position that's under this department. And so, again, you can go to the position quick card and look at that position, and from that, you could actually tell whether or not that position has been filled. And if you've got incumbents turned on in your positions, you can see who the incumbent is in that position. So that's very, again, once you go to the position card, you have all the full functionality of it's like going to look at that position in managed data. It's the same way. It's the same process. So this is a very quick way to be able to go in and look at something. And if you want to look at each department and how many people are in each department to see your bigger departments, you can do that. So it's a very, very quick, easy way without running reports to be able to not only see things at a high level, but then drill down into those areas that you have questions about. So that's one of the things you can do. If there is a head of department, that's a field that you could fill on your department. So you have a head of the department. You could show that on this card also, right on the main card there. You can say, who's the head? You can have, if you've got in the system, you've got photos in the system. You can have the photos show on here. So not only would it show the employee, but it would show their photo. So all that features are there and handy for you. The new feature that's in 1708 is once you have the basic core piece of it set up, you can now go in from this button right here and get into the layouts of these things without having to go to manage data, look up the company structure, the UI, and go in there and do things. And like in that area, the color, for example, has to be a hexadecimal code that you can get off the internet or whatever for that color code. Here, if you want to change the color, you get a color palette, and you can just go in and select the color. I don't know if you noticed, but let me go back one slide, or 2 slides actually, real quickly here. Come on. These are color code. When we talk about the color, it's just this band on color here. I should have mentioned that earlier. It's just a simple band, but it kind of breaks it up so you can kind of tell the difference between a business unit and division. At this point, that is the color that we talk about. So I want to make sure that when I talk about color, what we're talking about there. But currently, when you set it up originally, you have to go in and do a hexadecimal piece in there to get that code in there to get the right color. But once you've got it set up, you can go in and change the colors very easily from this screen. You can also see what fields are available. So the visible fields, we have cost center, start date, object ID, parent department. If you've got that filled in, it'll come up, the status, name. Now, if you've got some of these fields and you bring them up and you say, yes, I want to see those, but there's no value in there, it just leaves it blank. It doesn't put a blank value with it. It just doesn't bring the field in if it's not filled in. This is also how you can count the people by the current position or the current, the cost center or the current people. So you have different ways of setting this up to count the people and the positions. And this is all can be done now, right from on the screen, and providing, of course, this is all based upon permissions and what permissions you have. Of course, we want to secure this so not anybody can just change the colors or the layouts. But for your admins, this is where you would change the colors and layouts without having to go over to manage, admin center, manage data, and then find the actual UI to update. And you can update the different UIs. You pick ahead of time which one you're looking at, and so you can do that. And so that makes this very easy, quick. I think it's going to be a very helpful thing for managers and executives to be able to go in and look at that. How is our company actually laid out? And I also have found this very useful for a couple customers where we looked at this and I started to put this together and I looked at the structure and it wasn't what was intended to be when they designed everything. And so we are, in the process of resetting those structures to match up to what they want their structure to actually be. And so it's another way to very quickly look at this and lay out and say, gee, do I have all the right departments, all the right cost centers under that department? Do I have all the right departments under that business unit? So that as you've done your associations and you've built your master data, you can validate it very quickly from this to make sure that it's laid out the way you want it to be laid out. So that's very helpful when you go to do master data for an employee. And with that, if there's questions or anything, we can put those questions into QA so you don't forget what they are as we move forward. But at this point, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Kim to talk about her section.
Hi there. Good afternoon. Good morning to everybody. I'm going to cover the new assessment functionality within the learning module. Before I dive in, first I want to talk about why this new functionality is important to your organization. I think one of the key goals of a learning and development strategy for most organizations is to reduce your employees' time to competency. You really want to get their competency level up as quickly as you can, and that should be a key part of your strategy. So assessments can be a very important part of that strategy. And with the SuccessFactors assessments, you can associate them to your training courses as pre- and post-tests to measure the effectiveness of your training. And that allows you to refine your training to meet your employees' needs and ultimately get them to competency quickly. The other great part about the assessments is you can use them as part of an adaptive learning strategy, which allows your employees to skip content if they successfully pass the pre-test, or you can also have them avoid reviewing content if they pass the post-test. Again, that reduces the time to competency for your employees. So just kind of want to cover the why this is, can be very important to your organization. So I'm going to talk about the new assessment functionality in the third quarter release. So what SuccessFactors has done is made both quizzes and exams available in a new unified assessment tools. And for those of you that have been learning for a while, you may have possibly struggled with the legacy PQE exams, which are back from in the plateau days. And I know that some companies have even just completely shied away from using the exams within SuccessFactors because the usability has been, it can be pretty cumbersome to use the current functionality. So with this release, SuccessFactors is replacing those exams with the new assessment functionality. It has great features for your administrators. I'll cover some screenshots here, a new global navigation menu for both exams and quizzes, streamlined navigation for managing your assessments, and also the ability to add questions directly to your exams versus having to create those separately. So that really improves the process for your administrators. There's a few other smaller enhancements that I won't really get to in detail, but these are also great enhancements they put in this quarter, including the ability to import images into quizzes. You can bring images into your exams currently, but not into quizzes. There's a nice exam results page, so when the user finishes that exam, it pops up a nice little visual that gives them their score and a summary of their performance if you're using objectives. They're supporting additional fields in the question import data tool, and they've put out 2 new exam reports, which you'll see there on the slide. So just to give you kind of an overview of what the screens look like, in your content section within Learning, there's now a new Assessments tab. The search screen looks very similar to the rest of the Learning module, just their normal search screen. But when you choose to add a new assessment, you get the second screen at the bottom to either add a new quiz or add a new exam. And they have their definitions here, which you may be familiar with. Really, quizzes are their lightweight assessments, just meant for quick knowledge checks, and then the exams have the more formal assessments that have the more advanced features. So once you choose to either add a quiz or an exam, the screens look the same pretty much, whether it's an exam or a quiz, again, with their goal to get to very streamlined navigation. So you would add your basic exam information, which I've got here in the top screenshot, and then down here in the bottom, once you add it, you can select additional locales, so you can set your exams and quizzes up in as many languages as you would like. And then I know the screenshot's a little small, but over here, this menu on the right, this navigation is now the same for both exams and quizzes, where you can add your questions, do your exam or quiz settings, all from this same menu, which is very easy to follow. And then moving on to the next slide here. So again, one of the great features that they have in this release is the ability to add questions directly to your exam. Very simple user interface. You just pick what type of question, and then on the next screen, you have to give it a question ID, question type, and then down here in this bottom screen, again, sorry, screenshots are a little hard to read, but you type in your question text and then your answer text. Just very easy. You can copy and paste from Word if you've already, or Excel, any other tool if you've already got the exam written up in another tool. And then for your questions and your answers, they have a rich text editor. So you can put all that formatting in there. You can import images, do any of that kind of work. So just very, very simple process to get your questions added to your exams. And then on the next slide here, so really that's just the basic overview, but that's really about as simple. I mean, it is just that simple, just to really follow through their new navigation. They've made it very easy to use. So as I mentioned, their plan is to replace the legacy PQE functionality. So the next steps that I would encourage for any company that's already using the learning assessments is that you will want to start developing your strategy for migrating your current exams to the new assessments functionality. They are planning to retire the legacy tool towards the end of 2018. At that point, you won't be able to create exams using that tool anymore, but your users will be able to take those exams. They're going to retire that at some point beyond 2018. But in the release documentation, SuccessFactors does have a migration path, and I would highly encourage you to read through that and make sure you have a plan to get that done in 2018. So that's really it for the assessments functionality. I'm going to pass it over to Tracy, who is going to talk to you about some recruiting enhancements. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to type them down in the chat, and we will get to those at the end of the session.
Awesome. Thanks, Kim. So I'm going to talk about the foundation fields on the requisition, and we'll just jump straight in. Okay. Kind of excited about this one. The ability to use foundation objects was actually rolled out in Q2 2017, but we wanted to include it today because what it does is it allows clients to use their org structure items from EC. So one of the most common problems that I've had and I've heard over and over again over dozens of clients is that the standard fields for division, department, location, cost center, those come from the derived fields. So that means you have to have an active user in that division, department, or location for those fields to populate. And this has been the bone of contention for many, many implementations. It's very challenging for clients. Many clients have started using workaround of creating custom fields with pick lists to manage and get around this problem, which solves the problem, but then it creates more manual work because then you have to create custom fields, put them on the career site, as well as manage all those pick lists. And then, of course, you have to make sure that the data in those pick lists align with your foundation data in EC, which is really risky. Governance is hard enough as it is. So you can see that I included a table just to show the number of fields that are included in this offering. There are the 6 standard fields for legal entity, business unit, department, division, cost center, and location. You add these in to your XML. This is not done on the managed templates like the Admin Center tool that a lot of people use to manage recruiting. So if you wanted to use this functionality, you do need the help of professional services. Permission for these fields lives in role-based permissions, so it's a little bit different than your standard fields. But when you have these turned on, you would leave the standard fields there, and then once you're ready, you can disable those fields from Admin Center. That way it gives you the ability to leave those on and migrate data from one field to the next. It's an amazing feature and it solves some pretty big problems. I would caution, or I would recommend caution in rolling it out just because you have to be intentional and do things in an order so that you have the data cared for your existing requisitions. Because in a production environment, of course, you have the recs are posted and you want to keep your traffic moving, but you also want to roll out change. So it's one of those, making changes while you're flying the plane. It does take considered effort and care. I included also a little bit of in the weeds information because you might be thinking, well, gosh, if you have these fields and they're foundation items, how do you make sure the labels are right? And the labels are updated based on your configuration. And it looks at lots of fun if, then, else statements so that you can see, for example, if your succession data model is updated, it uses that. And then if not, it goes down into further options. So it is scaled out pretty deep. Which makes me happy that this has been tested and vetted, and I like the way that the labeling works. You don't have to update it in yet another place. I don't want to read through the whole flow chart for you, but it is pretty detailed so far as how that rolls out and how easy they've made it. So I'm pretty pleased with that piece. Also included with this is tokens. So in recruiting, we love tokens because we're talking to candidates and trying to hire them and facilitate offers, and having tokens that work in these fields is paramount. So all of those tokens do work. The token resolution fails if you don't have the proper permission for those foundation objects, because remember the permissions are held in role-based permissions. That's just a little call out to be careful of, and the thing to kind of have on your radar if you're rolling this out. A common issue when your tokens don't work is that your permissions aren't right in role-based permissions. And again, the tokens, just like the regular tokens, work in your requisition They also work in the offer detail and then all of your email notifications that go out in the system. And then for reporting purposes, what's kind of interesting is even though they're foundation elements, you need to be sure that these items are added to the custom tokens area on the back end in provisioning. So that would require professional services as well to make sure that that's updated. It's pretty easy to update though, so it shouldn't be too bad in making that change. I think when you make moves and implementation changes, oftentimes it's not the technical aspect, but it's the change management. That is difficult. So please be aware that now there are changes to the UI. So you'll see differences in the job requisition summary. You can also use those fields for filter and display options on your summary page, on your requisition listing. And then they're also exposed in the career search settings. So when you are a candidate and you're out on the career page, you can search by these items. They're also available for your OOData API operations. So if you have integrations in scope or in your solution, it's important to mind those as well, because there will be integration updates that are needed. And that is the end of my discussion. Please, if you have any questions at all, please do enter them into the chat. And I'm going to pass this back over to Dodie and Linda.
Great. Oh, thanks, everybody. Go ahead, Linda.
I think Linda's having technical difficulties, so I will go ahead and take the questions from here. This is Marissa. Okay. Thanks, everybody, for attending. We do hope that you found this information helpful and intriguing. So if you have any questions at this point, please feel free to put them in the question box or raise your hand, and Dodie or myself can unmute you so that we could have some dialogue. We did have a couple of questions that came in before to promote some further chatting if nobody has questions at this point.
Marissa, this is Dan. I did see one question around the company org structure in the Q&A section. And the question was, does the company org hierarchy support custom MDFs? Yes, if you've got custom MDF objects out there for your organizational area, and they are associated to other objects, MDF objects, yes, it will support those. We would just have to know what, that is not shown there as part of the default, but yes, it does support the custom objects.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dan. One of the other questions that came in for you, Dan, was what were some of the common errors that are associated with setting up the new structure?
Well, I can tell you some of the common areas is that in the past, the way the associations were done, many of them were working fine, but as of the last two releases, many of them have broken, and a lot of it has to do with having the right parent-child relationship in place, and then also making sure that all the components for that association are in place, including the field criteria. The field criteria is one of the areas that, in order for this to work properly, SuccessFactors, it looks like, has added additional coding around that area, and that is going ahead and causing some areas to have a little bit of trouble. I know I've got multiple customers that are having slight problems with that, and we're working with those customers to fix that because it worked in the past, but now with the new releases, it's not working as efficiently as it should. So we're working with them to take care of that. But it's really making sure your associations are what you want them to be, and that all the components for that association are in correctly and working.
Okay, great. Thanks. That's helpful. Looks like the next question is actually for you, Kim, and that question is, what areas should an administrator pay attention to when they are setting up these new learning assessments?
That's a great question. So a couple things that I found is when you first started using the new functionality, you have to actually, you need to make each exam question active, and so that's really so you could set up, let's say, 10 questions in your exam, and you may just want to only make 8 of them active. So you do need to really make sure that you set your questions as active, and then you also have to publish your exam and quiz, exam or quiz prior to launching it. And it makes sense the way they set up that functionality, but it just can be a little bit easy to overlook those steps. I mean, obviously you would want to test out your exam and your quiz, and you would catch it there. And then really the second thing I would point out to pay attention to is documentation seems to imply that I had mentioned there's a really nice page that pops up for the end user once they complete the exam, and it seems that that would be there by default, but you actually have to enable that post-exam, post-quiz behavior as you set up each new assessment. So just really kind of pay close attention to the settings, and just thoroughly test out your exams and quizzes, and you'll catch those things.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kim. Tracy, it looks like the next question is for you, and I apologize if you already covered this in any capacity, but the question is, what about all the requisitions that they already have open and the ones that use the standard field? How do they migrate those?
Okay, that's a really good question. So there's 2 different ways you can do it. So if you are opening your requisitions from the front end, so you're not moving from position, right? You would open your current requisitions and then go in there when you have both of your division fields, for example. You're going to have a standard and a foundation element, and you would go in and make sure that your new field matches what your old field was. And you'd go through the exercise for all of the fields that are relevant to all of your open requisitions. I recommend maybe finding a junior analyst that can maybe do some of that heavy lifting for you. And then once that's done, then you would deactivate your standard fields, and that way it would feel seamless. Does that make sense? So that's what you would do from the front end. And then the clients who are opening from the position, they would go through the same exercise, assuming they have the permission to update those fields. So it's going to be a per client basis on the permissioning. So you might have to have a slightly different strategy based on your configuration because they're all special, right? But that's what you have to do. You have to make sure that your new fields have the data that your old ones have because you're going to decommission those old ones. Does that make sense?
Okay. I think so. Thank you, Tracy.
Sure.
I'll go ahead and pause for a second. Dodie, did you happen to have any questions come in that you can see or anybody raise their hand?
No, I think we've got them all. Thanks, Marissa.
Okay, perfect. So then there's just one more question here, and it again, Tracy, is for you, and it's just a quick question, I think, on how can we report on these new fields?
Yeah, so the new fields, we would just have to add them in the custom reporting and provisioning on the back end. And once those are set up, we would just, after you go through the process of decommissioning those fields on your requisition, then what I would typically do is decommission them in reporting. That way you don't accidentally pick an old field that's seemingly broken because it's empty or it doesn't have complete data. It's just because it's a decommissioned field. So as important as enabling the new fields, it's also equally important to either decommission the old ones or being intentional on the naming convention that you use so that you can tell one from the other. Because when you're pulling a report and ad hoc reports, if they both say division, you're not going to know which one is which. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so. Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Well, if there's no other questions, I guess that will complete our session for today. So Dodie, I'll turn it over to you for any last words.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thank you so much to the attendees for sticking with us through this. Hopefully you all got some nuggets that will help you going forward. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us on this webinar. We'll be happy to help you. look forward to our next quarter webinar, and we plan to do the same thing again, so hopefully you'll all be able to join us. Also wanted to thank all of our presenters, Dan, Tracy, and Kim, as well as Marissa Gervais for helping to moderate the questions. Thanks, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thanks, Dodie.